Okay, Assalamu alaikum. So, welcome everybody. We are delighted to have this program organized for everybody. And this is a very important and interesting topic. And the topic is, as you probably already know, the intersection of science, faith, and modernity, and who has the solutions to the problems of COVID. And so, we have some questions that we are going to pose to two eminent, world-renowned people. And I think both of them are very well known to you. But I'll just go through quick introductions of each one of them. Sheikh Fayaz is our Imam with the Muslim Council of Calgary. He's also a chaplain at the University of Calgary and was one of the recipients of the Interfaith Award, the United Nations Interfaith Award, and went to Jordan to receive that. And he has been very active member of the Calgary Interfaith Council for many years now, and does a lot of dawah work as well as teaching and education. Personally, I have benefited from his talks and from his knowledge and wisdom and wit quite often. Being a part of our Islamic Association Northwest Calgary talks, particularly I have enjoyed his presentations over a long period of time with regard to the interfaith work open house that we had for the mosque, and we invited our non-Muslim community, and that was very well received. So I think we can benefit from his wisdom one more time. Dr. Naweed Syed, he's a professor of cell biology and anatomy. He got his PhD from England, and he has been with the University of Calgary. And I think as a faculty myself, I am pretty certain that we are highly indebted to his presence here at the University of Calgary. He brought many grants, and not only that, his innovative work in area of cell biology has been a talk of the world. He was on the Newsweek cover, and he has been a recipient of numerous awards locally as well as from Pakistan and internationally. At one point in time, I did advocate that we should nominate him for Nobel Prize, and I'm sure he will get it. His work that he is doing with cell biology, particularly in area of how the computer world and the chips can talk to human brains, really is an innovative idea. And talking to him some time ago, I was very heartened by an aspect of treatment that he may be working on. I hope it's not a state secret, and that is through his work, he could develop a system where people can be alerted for an upcoming seizure disorder, and they can take precautions and save their lives and also alert the systems. So we are delighted to have him here too. So a number of questions for each one of them. To be fair, I think I'll go one by one. One question from science and one question from faith. At the end, we are also going to try to take some questions from the floor, and those who really want to make sure that they are first in the queue. I know that Dr. Fayaz Rafiq was really wanting me to put some questions up. I said, why don't you actually bring them up in the question answer panel as well? So I will really encourage people to put their questions in the Q&A so they are first in line. So with that, welcome everybody. And I'm going to ask Sheikh Fayaz to start with Talawat al-Kalami part. Sheikh Fayaz.
Assalamu alaikum everyone. Welcome. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. ولنبلونكم بشيء من الخوف والجوع ونقص من الأموال ونقص من الأموال والأنفس والثمرات وبشر الصابرين الذين إذا أصابتهم مصيبة قالوا إنا لله وإنا إليه راجعون أولئك عليهم صلوات من ربهم ورحمة وأولئك هم المهتدون صدق الله العظيم.
My first question is to Syed, Naweed Syed, Dr. Naweed Syed. Why has science failed to understand this virus despite of enough warning? We have made lots of advancements. Why do we have that problem?
So Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum to everyone. And thank you, Dr. Rahman, for that kind introduction. I think only Allah is worthy of all the praises. I think this is an interesting, really question. How much time do you have? We could talk about this for almost decades and still not be able to really answer the question. But I think, I would like to say that science is nothing to be ashamed of, even in the ruins of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. For science, it's really sufficient that it is science and it is really subservient to the human needs. So if I were to really split your question into two parts, and the first part that I think I would like to highlight or say a few things is that, science, whether, it has truly failed or the idea will be to, can we really understand this virus first? And then we can talk about whether it's been a success or it has been a failure. Since I am the only phony doctor among all the real doctors who are listening, I'm the basic scientist. So, I'm not an immunologist. I'm not an infectious disease expert. I'm just a pure, basic, fundamental neuroscientist and neurobiologist. So if I were to give you medical examples, I think you will step on my tail and maybe crush my head. So I would like to really take you on a very different walk through the forest. And what I really think is that, all these viruses, they are terrorists. This is how I would perceive them. And they're terrorists in a sense that, there are many attributes that they share with the common threat, which is really a terrorist. So it's a terrorist attack in a sense that, it is terrorists because just like this beast, neither of them are really living or dead. Like terrorists, this beast also has no brain. And they have been exploited by animals and the scientists alike. We scientists have actually used them to try to understand how cellular functions really work, whereas animals have exploited them for their own advantage. They have no home, nothing to live on, and nothing to live for. They also contain some elements of the living organisms. For example, they will have nucleic acid, either DNA or RNA, either one of them. And they put on a little cloak, aba, amama, or whatever you call them, around their heads, around their bodies, which is also stolen from the previous host. They don't have the capacity to independently read the script or scriptures, you can say, the nucleic acid, which is the basic backbone, or to act upon the information that is contained within those nucleic acid and the messages. So they also cannot reproduce themselves or thrive outside their host environment because they lack the complicated machinery that a host cell possesses. So no known virus contain ribosomes, and these are required for protein synthesis, which are really the fundamental building blocks of any structure or any organisms. They bind to our AEC2 receptors in humans on the host. And what they really do is that they hijack it, and it forces its pilots which is the protein synthetic machinery, to produce viral proteins. And host machinery is then forced to produce RNA or DNA and to build proteins that are based on the instruction which is encoded in the RNA. So the question is, are they really alive or they're dead? So the answer is yes or no. And they have no metabolic processes, so like other living cells, so they cannot generate energy, which is ATP. They have no translational machinery. They have no ribosomes. They are obligate intracellular parasites. And strictly considering, we can say that they are really non-living. Now the question is, where do they come from? Think about, there are three basic mechanisms that these viruses are coming from. And I think it's important for us to understand why we have not been able to tackle them. And some of them are progressive, or there is a escape hypothesis that they arose from genetic elements that gain the ability to move between cells randomly. And some people believe that they are remnant of cellular organisms, for example, bacteria or yeast and other organisms. And then the third theory is that they evolved with their current cellular hosts. So wherever they are living, they actually evolved through them or within them. Now, the other major issue is the host itself. So when you think about the immune system, which is extremely oppressive and aggressive in lower animals. So, these terrorists don't come out of blue, but they are really the remnant or the outcome of a society that has oppressed them or have marginalized them. And these viruses are actually the same way, because when they infect a particular animal, for example, a bat or a rat, the immune system of these animals is so robust that they will tackle these viruses and attack them. And to survive, these viruses have to constantly mutate and change their identity. Sometimes they become lone wolves. Sometimes they become an organized machinery to cause really havoc. And these terrorists would need to be, would need to keep up with all the bashing and this oppression that they get. And they constantly mutate all the time. And as a result, they become really very, very virulent, very, very aggressive. So for humans, our immune system is 150 million years behind even a rat. So when we get attacked, our security system, which is again our immune system, has not kept up with the evolutionary trends. So we are taken for a ride because of our kindness. So in some cases also, we overreact. So we have what we call a cytokine storm, which is really dangerous overcorrection of our immune system, which they are foot soldiers, are cytokines, and they keep raging long after the virus is no longer a threat. So it really creates fear, anxiety, paranoia, Islamophobia among the normal citizens of our body, which are there to really support us. And we live in a harmonious situation all the time. So these cytokines then attack multiple organs, which is, kidney, your lungs, heart, and brain, and eventually leading to the death of this culprit. So this really is, I say, a racism, prejudice, Islamophobia, or whatever you call it, on part of our own immune system that then attacks itself because it has been intimidated or attacked by an entity which is a common enemy for all of those. Scientists tackled them in the past, and they have done it successfully. We have, vaccine for smallpox that used to really infect so many people. We have vaccine for chickenpox. There's a viruses. Rabies destroys brain cells if not treated. 100% fatality. We can cure it now. HIV, which affected 32 million people died. We have got a pretty good handle. The science has actually handled. Antivirus, which came in the United States from deer, mouse droppings, and infected people, it has been contained. Ebola kills 90% of infected people. We've got a pretty good handle. And then you have Marburg virus, which was actually brought into the lab through monkeys that were imported from Uganda. And it really causes severe hemorrhage in your brain and bleeding throughout the body, a 50% death rate. Now, the coronavirus is actually doing exactly the same thing in young people. It is producing exactly those symptoms. So influenza, we have Spanish flu, as you talked about, dengue, rotavirus, polioviruses, herpes. We've got a pretty good handle on all of these. But the second part of your question is that, why science has failed. There are multiple reasoning, and it's a collateral societal failure. The terrorist attack could have been prevented. This terrorist attack could have been prevented. Our health authorities, they are failing to learn lessons from previous flare-ups. Too often, the search for research attention and investments that, involve or for these novel outbreaks, it quickly fades away once the disease or the threat really disappears, the priority changes. So after this, you will really have the economy switching over. There has been no sustained and coordinated effort on infectious diseases collectively from the human perspective. So we need also sustained investment in
Dr.
better
Syed,
understanding of
if I
viruses.
can interrupt, because I think we need to give a chance to Sheikh Fayaz to take his turn. But the summary that I've received so far is that rats are smarter than us because they are able to combat that. But we haven't really learned about how to deal with this because we are relatively new species. So thank you very much for that update. Sheikh Fayaz, question to you. Does Islam teach us anything about dealing with such communicable diseases? That will be, something that many people have asked me these questions on the side and would like to know.
Jazakumullahu khairan. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Again, thank you for allowing us to be part of such a great panel, a decorated panel as well, I'll bet. First of all, I just want to comment on Professor Naweed Imam Syed's comments. The reason why science is struggling from a faith perspective is that Wallahu ya'lamu antum la ta'lamun. Allah is omniscient, we are not omniscient. Allah knows all things, huwa alimu kulli shay, and we are still learning. And the knowledge that human beings have been given, I'm not going to compare it to rats or mice, as Professor Naweed Imam Syed said, but we have been given very little knowledge, and our knowledge compared to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's knowledge, not only is it dim or weak, but it's pretty much, ma'adum or nothing. That doesn't mean that we should not lose hope though, because it is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala who gives knowledge to people, who gives knowledge to our scientists, and we're praying for, our scientists and our leaders on the front lines who are trying to bring about, a vaccination and maybe antiviral medication soon as well. And the reason why we need to support science, despite the fact that we've been given very little knowledge, is the Prophet ﷺ also said, لِكُلِّ دَاءٍ دَوَاءٌ, that for every disease there is a cure. And similar to Ebola, HIV, chickenpox, and all of these other viral diseases, alhamdulillah, the human race, scientists, we've come together and we've done an ijtihad within the realm of science, and we've been able to tackle these things and put them almost to bed, alhamdulillah ta'ala. So those were some of the comments that I wanted to share right off the bat. As far as communicable diseases are concerned, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speaks about them, and the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he's also articulated some recommendations regarding them. So there's one particular hadith where the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, "La adwa fil Islam." There is no communicable or transitive diseases in Islam except with the permission of Allah. So there are many situations where a person was suffering from leprosy or other diseases which were high as far as the rate of infectivity is concerned, similar to the coronavirus or COVID-19. And Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he said, in those situations, لا يورد ممرض على مصح, that a person with a communicable disease should not come into the vicinity or the area or near a person who was healthy. And that's why even our Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, when it came to influenza and when it came to the common cold, it comes in the hadith that Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam would sneeze bithawbihi. He would sneeze into his clothes. He would cover his sneeze as well. There's also many hadith wherein our Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he said that if there is a town which is stricken by a pandemic or a plague, Those outside of that town should not go into that area or that geographic region, and those within that geographic region should not exit until things get settled, simply because we don't want to proliferate this communicable disease. And one of the maqasid, or one of the reasons why Islam has been sent, is to preserve life. And that's why, although Jumu'ah and Taraweeh and congregating in the masjid are great symbols of Islam, the preservation of life is given preference than offering our prayers collectively and in congregational manner as well.
Jazakallah khair, Sheikh Fayaz. So next question is for Dr. Syed. Sir, you have already answered part of the question, but I still want to go back to that. How can such a small thing with no brain, and sometimes we don't even know what they are, can bring down superpowers to their knees?
So I think I would like to counter what Sheikh said, that, you know, I related humans to rats and mice. That I think this is not, they're all the creatures, and in them are the signs for humans to really learn. Allah had said that, why don't you ponder an intellect, and you have to accept God through your own research and your intellectual abilities. He has given you eyes and ears, and He has made you ashraful makhlukat. But at the same time, the most important and emphasis is actually given to the intellect. When you think about Islam or any religion or faith is not acceptable, and a scientist thinks about all these creations of Allah, from a bee to an insect to all these animals, from a bat to humans, using his own intellect and his own brain. And I think without this, we are really no better than other animals, other beasts. So I think a scientist thinks about them, so he or she worships more effectively and as per the teachings of Islam, and then somebody who just performs Taraweeh or prays 5 times a day. So on that, I think, why is it, the question is that small things with no brains bring down the superpower? Really, the problems are manifold. For politicians, it's a popularity contest. You know, most money is being spent on weapons and other creating luxury items. Political razzmatazz and the shenanigans, the fight between different political parties have really distracted us considerably. It has taken the funding away from research and also interest in training a future generation of scientists. The investments in technologies, research facilities, infrastructures, they have all really dwindled. And the problem is, whenever an issue like this occurs, then they think of scientists and they come to science. The moment that problem is resolved, the funding and the situation goes away. And then we get attacked with all of these kinds of diseases. So I think the government, you think about Trump, he was really pointing out, saying the media is all fake. So when you have media, which is an important mode of communication, disconnects the people, then he went to church and he said, I have gotten this revelation. You should give them all disinfectants, feed them disinfectants. So all of a sudden, scientists are really running all around trying to find the solutions, whereas the problems are exacerbated by, the government and then our leaders.
Thank you. That's, I think, comprehensively brings it to the main point, and that is that not only that Western powers need to put their funding in research, but we as Muslims in countries which have so much money that they don't even know where to spend, we need to have leadership that can actually put their emphasis on scientific research and make a contribution that way. And if we can bring the education up, and as well as do our own research, then we need to make our contributions. We can't just depend on one country or one place or a few places. We all need to be part of this process. So I think this is very, very important. That's something that needs to be re-emphasized again and again. It's not just true for America or Canada, it's true for our countries back home as well. My next question is for Sheikh Fayaz, and it's a little complicated. My apologies, Sheikh Fayaz, for that. I'm bringing a little bit of a complicated history to that, to put it in context. And that is, as you know, there have been various deadly diseases prior to Spanish flu of 1918. These include repeated plagues that spread through Europe, famous ones being the plague of Justinian of 541 AD, the Black Death of 1347, the Italian plague of 1629, the Great Plague of London, the Great Plague of Marseilles. And one of the things that I was reading Spanish history, and I realized that a certain segment of society was particularly marked as responsible for bringing diseases into Europe. And we are seeing these similar things now. Some people claiming that it is coming from country A or country B or country C, which is really scapegoating. My question to you is, how do you compare the responses of Europe to these plagues versus the one that we are facing right now, from a theological perspective as well as from any other angle that you want to talk about?
Thank you. That's a great question. So when the Black Death swept across Asia and Europe in the 1340s, the upheaval was actually extraordinary. And for those of us who've actually studied this and read up on this, up to half of the population of Europe died over the course of 4 years. And thereafter, the bubonic plague, wreaked global havoc, in the centuries that followed. So some responses to those academics were pragmatic, and others were breakingly inhumane. And what's striking, as far as 2020 and coronavirus or COVID-19 is concerned, is some of our actions are quite similar to those of our ancestors. So since the break of the coronavirus, there have been rumors of people intentionally spreading the disease, and these reports appear to be true. For example, people in Britain have been arrested for maliciously coughing on others, especially the old and the vulnerable. And in the plague, which was in Geneva, 16th century, a rumor broke out that house clearers and carers were trying to spread the plague through the city as well. And the question is why? Why would somebody want to be that vindictive to spread this disease, right? So some worried that carers resented putting their lives at risk. And that's so much resentment and anger and frustration built in within them that they said, you know what, if I'm going to die, everyone may die as well. And this is where you need Islam, because Islam is the book of guidance. The Quran is the book of guidance, and it appreciates science. It wants science to advance, and that's why many of the great scholars who learned theology, they were excellent mathematicians and scientists as well. And we don't want to get into that history, but even this whole social distancing or physical distancing or quarantine, it comes from an Islamic concept called arba'iniya, which means not 40 days. It means, quarantine and social distance and isolate yourself as long as it is required for our scientists, who are very important, to figure out what they need to figure out to ensure that the disease is not transitive and does not communicate further. So, people were doing this for two reasons. They resented putting their lives at risk, and others were paranoid that workers were profiteering from the infection by raiding the victims' houses after they died. One great thing we learned actually in 16th century is that in England, they were publishing death tolls, not only in the cities, but in the country as well. And this helped gauge how virulent the outbreak was compared to previous ones, and could also act as a guide on which parts of the city to avoid. And that's why if you go on CBC or CTV News, they will show a map of where the hot zones are, just so we can avoid those hot zones and be conscious and cognizant to avoid those areas as well. But the thing that I think you were alluding to, Dr. Abdul Rahman, is blaming minorities. And frequent rumors were rampant across medieval and early modern Europe. They were blaming actually Jewish communities, which were already shunned in most Christian states, for the plague prompting mass arrests and executions. And this type of behavior and this type of moral degradation is categorically forbidden. And the reason why Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, la udwa fil Islam, there is no transitive disease in Islam except with the permission of Allah, is that if I were to come over to your home, Dr. Abdul Rahman, and Allah protect, and if I were to get infected, I have no right to blame you. But what I say is, ما أصاب من مصيبة إلا بإذن الله. Whatever is decreed for me, that was already written, and my heart is content knowing that whatever is meant for me will never miss me, and whatever misses me was never meant for me. And the Muslim community actually took in many Jewish brothers and sisters, and they helped them and assisted and aided them to make sure that they weren't, survivors, nor either victims of persecution as well.
Thank you, Jazakallah khair, for a very elaborate answer. So another next question is for Professor Naweed Syed. How many kinds of coronaviruses exist? You are professor of cell biology, so I'm sorry, I had to ask you this question, not Sheikh Fayaz. Will there be Corona 20 A, B, or C, or something like that in future?
So I think, it's again very lengthy question, or they require a quite detailed, description. But, these SARS, the whole coronaviruses that comes from crown, they look like they actually crown on the head. And these viruses tend to be in mostly bats, and they are, so robust in a bat that they constantly mutate. And then they transfer there to any nocturnal animals, and eventually human consume them. So, we have seen many of these COVID or coronaviruses. SARS was the one, for example, in 2002 from China. It came from bats to nocturnal animals, then to human beings. And it had 9.6% mortality rate. And we still don't have vaccine for it. But this particular virus was interesting in a sense that it caused havoc immediately as it enters the body, and immediately was detected, and people were really put under observation or under treatment and cure. But at the same time, this virus did not have the ability to survive in human body, so I almost committed suicide. And then then Mother Nature kind of took care of this. Then you have these MERS COVID virus. It came from the Middle East, from Saudi Arabia in 2012, and then in 2015 from South Korea. And it came from bat to camel and then human. And the mortality rate for this one was really, really nasty. With 30 to 40% people will die from this Middle Eastern respiratory virus. Most lethal of all the COVIDs that exist currently. And now that you have these coronaviruses, they also transfer from animals to human, and we really have no particular vaccine. And this COVID-19 has done something remarkable, and it could not have been engineered in a lab. It could have only happened in nature, whereby it has really created these 12 amino acid spikes. They're like spears, and they dig into our cell really, really tightly. And to fool our immune system, it has covered itself with what we call the sugar molecules or carbohydrates. So these carbohydrates cover its spikes, and our immune systems and the body cells cannot recognize it. By the time it recognizes, it's a week or 2 weeks down, and then the virus has really caused havoc. So these viruses have been around for many, many years. They will there be another one? I will not be surprised if this thing boomerangs even this year and then the years. And these viruses have really been there for many long time. This is not the first time we're dealing with them, and this won't be the last time.
Thank you. Unfortunately, the next question is also for you. The question is not why 2% people die in this, or approximately around that age. It may change or vary from whether it's a country has older population or younger population, and a number of other factors. But an equally good question is why 98% survive. What are the possible ways the body has built some mechanism to fight off these infections? What do we have already in place?
So, it's really interesting is that, now there are really more than 2% people really dying. And they are mostly, it depends on the level of infection, how extensive the culture or the virus was transferred into an individual, how good their immune system is, whether they have previously been immune to some of these coronaviruses or their replicates. And also, I think depends on your immune system. So it's really a combination of your own defense mechanism as to how you handle and what your conditions are. If you are diabetic, if you're have other respiratory problems, it will exacerbate, because this virus, when it enters your lung, it actually creates these vacuoles, the air traps. And these air traps become fibrotic because of the immune system trying to handle those viruses that are hidden in these air sacs and air particles. And as a result, your lung would look like almost a carpet. So even these people, they recover. It's a good sign that they recover, but there's no guarantee that they can fall victim to this virus once again, and even more in a more nastier way. Right? So I think the idea around this is that this virus mutates so quickly that even when it leaves an individual and you infect a second person, that virus could have already been mutated 20%. So then it really depends on combination of what other exacerbating factors are. This could really make the actual illness even worse.
Thank you. My next question is to Fayaz, how spirituality aids in healing the mind?
How does spirituality aid in healing the mind?
Or helps? And aid is not that aid, it's helping, I mean.
No worries. Well, subhanAllah, as far as the human brain is concerned, we're indebted to Professor Naweed, Imam Syed, who was the first scientist to connect brain cells to a silicone chip. So, as far as the mind is concerned and the brain is concerned, he knows much more than I think I do for sure, and many of us. So I just wanted to say we're indebted to Professor Naweed, Imam Syed, for all your contribution, the great work you've done for humanity. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala increase that work and accept that work, inshallah. It helps because it makes the human being realize that we have limitations. And it also makes us realize that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is in control. And there's a verse in the Quran where Allah says there's a possibility that you may dislike something, but in reality it's good for you. And there's also a possibility that you may love something, but in reality it's bad for you. And then the crux of that particular verse is wherein God says, Allahu ya'lam wa antum la ta'lamun. God knows and we don't know. So I think, isolation and social distancing, it's great for the soul, as far as COVID-19 is concerned. It was only in the cave of Hira, when the Prophet ﷺ was in isolation, that the illumination of guidance was brought to him in the form of revelation. It was only in the, dark, lonely, isolated whale of the belly, belly of the whale. I'm fasting, belly of the whale. That Yunus alayhi salatu wasalam dua was heard as well. So I think it brings us back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, these trials. And if we put our trust in Allah, and again, when we put our trust in Allah, this doesn't mean that we'd be reckless or lackadaisical or negligent. The Prophet ﷺ gave many recommendations as far as communicable diseases is concerned, but there's also a very important hadith that I think we should highlight. And that is, he said, Antum a'lamu bi umuri dunyakum. He said, you know about your worldly affairs more than I do. So when it comes to, for example, standing 2 meters apart, or when it comes to not having 15 people in one particular area, we as Muslims are obliged to take the recommendation of our doctors, our health authorities, and our scientists as well. And also realize that that is also part of our spiritual development, that we do whatever is required to ensure that we don't spread the disease, we try not to contract the disease, and saving a life is not only part of physical health, but it's also part of our spiritual obligations as well.
Thank you, but I would like to add something to what you have said, Sheikh Fayaz, and I hope, if you disagree, you will speak up on that. I'm sure you will, because we often do have those differences. So I think the point I was really getting to was that praying and having that mindset and really believing in a higher power, and knowing that we don't have control on everything, but we trust that whatever decision Allah makes, He knows best, and therefore, that can relieve and reduce a lot of anxiety, because there's a lot of stress going on. When there's so much stress, people who really, struggle with that piece, really their hormones go up and their defense system go up, and that creates them more vulnerable to diseases. So I think faith, in some ways, in my view, uh, you know, if you really truly believe in, will ground you, will settle you, will reduce the anxiety that you can otherwise have, because now you really have something else to rely on. And that way, it can be healing, and it may have impact on not only your disease, but also the outcome. I hope you agree with that.
Definitely, definitely agree with that. You said two interesting words among many other great words. You said it's prayer is grounding and it's settling. And there's a verse in the Quran which speaks about, ala bi dhikrillahi tatma'innul qulub, that it is only through the remembrance of God, whether it's physical remembrance like salah, whether it's dua in supplication, or whether it's just knowing that Allah is in control in our salah or in our meditation. And the word that Allah uses in this particular verse is itmi'nan. It's very close to the Urdu word itminan, and the Persian word as well. So in Persian and in Urdu, we have this word itminan, which means, it doesn't mean, peace. It means that which is settled, that which is grounded. See, the Prophet ﷺ, his heart was settled. He, despite going through many difficulties and sacrifices and enduring a lot of pain throughout his life, but it was because of that meditation, that prayer, those du'as, that kept him grounded and settled and undisturbed. So definitely, I think prayer, it makes us pause. And somebody once, tweeted something recently, or not so recently, that they say, when you're angry, pause. When you're upset, pause. When you're worried, pause. And when you pause, pray.
Right. Thank you. My next question is Professor Naweed Syed, and it's really in continuity of my previous question. Can this experience of COVID-19 change your brain forever? And how can this be reversed? How does healing of disease takes place in human minds?
I think it's a really great question. And, recently you will begin to hear that the young people who everybody thought were immune to this COVID-19, they actually die because of the stroke in their brain, because this virus not only has started to invade the nervous system physically, but it has also activated our immune system and cytokines to really create the blood vessels, havoc in the blood vessels, and eventually their rupture. So this is really the physical impact of virus on our brain, but also I think the fear and also anxiety, which it is really instilling in us, is much more long lasting. So I always give the example that we had these rats, and I will again, Sheikh may not like it, but Allah is never, shies away from citing a mosquito or a bee or even a fly in the Holy Quran, because these are all signs and symbols that he draws, and he says in the Quran as well that there are numbers, there are values that are well defined, we have written them, we know them, and we have imparted those upon to you also to discover as well. So I think these secrets are all written. It's for us to really go and search them. So this fear really creates havoc in our brain, in a sense that it permanently changes the circuit. So we use a rat, we expose them to cherry blossom for the first time, and then we shock them. Now every time, whenever this rat will smell cherry blossom, it freezes, it has anxiety, it has panic, it will have post-traumatic stress disorder, its EEG is, cardiograms, everything goes skyrocketing. Now if you take its babies, children, they have never been exposed to cherry blossom or shocked, but whenever they are exposed to cherry blossom, they will exhibit the same responses. They will also freeze, they will have post-traumatic stress disorder, and their children as well. So, this fear and anxiety that is implicated by these viruses is permanently imprinted, not in the genome, but in your neural circuits. And these neural circuits then carry that particular code the mode of, what we call synaptic plasticity onto the next generation, and then passes on to generation. So this intergenerational oppression is really, really remarkable. But, for this virus, this isolation, this quarantining, the economy fear, the fear of what's going to happen, the fear of unknown, is just creating really traumatic changes in our brain, which is leading to paranoia, which is leading to people hoarding behavior. So I think to reverse all of this, we need to go back to, as Sheikh said, to the true values of Islam: be kind, be gentle, take a break, get away from all of this razzmatazz, link back to people, start giving, start communicating, start connecting, all the things that we had really given up.
Thank you, Mr. Khalafat. So my next question is for Sheikh Fayaz, and that is principles of Prophet Muhammad ﷺ: do not harm and don't get harmed. Are there any hadiths explaining the stopping of spread and social isolation?
Thank you for the question. So before we get into the hadith, la dharar wa la dirar, that do not harm and do not reciprocate harm, I think it's important, again, that when the fly or the mosquito or the ant or a bee is actually mentioned in the Quran, as human beings we're obligated to ponder and have tafakkur and ta'ammul with respect to the creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And it's only when we see the creation, we can see the greatness of our creator behind that creation. And for those of us, mashallah, who live at the foot of the mountains, I say Calgarians and Albertans, we live in Allah's country, and that is the mountains. So that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, أَفَلَا يَنْظُرُونَ إِلَى الْجِبَالِ كَيْفَ نُصِبَتْ. Do you not look at the mountains and how they keep the earth stabilized? I'm not a scientist, and the Quran is not a book of science as well. But no, by all means, Professor Naweed, Imam, Syed, I take great pride. Jazakumullahu khairan for reminding me of that in the Quran and in the guidance that it has actually given us. As far as the hadith at hand is concerned, that do not harm and do not reciprocate harm, we learn from this that first and foremost, all human life is important, and we all bleed red. It's unfortunate that we live in a world where there's still systemic racism, and there are certain segments and pockets in our communities, whether it's in Canada, and that would be the First Nation, Métis and Inuit community, or also the African American community in the United States, which unfortunately aren't getting the same health care or the same medical treatment that others are getting as well. So that's one of the ways of ensuring that, that hadith teaches us that all human beings are equal, they're sanctified, and they're honored. Again, as far as the recommendations of spreading communicable diseases is concerned, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, we spoke about tawakkul, but tawakkul has to be qualified. So he says, tie your camel and then have tawakkul in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So again, I did mention this, and I don't want to reiterate my message here because time is always of essence. Do not go into a geographic area which has a pandemic or a plague. Do not exit. Wash your hands frequently. Sneeze into your sleeve or your cloth, and don't bring a person with a communicable disease in the presence of those who are healthy as well.
Thank you.
And then there's also putting our reliance on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which again, it doesn't contradict taking medication. So Rasulullah was once asked, "O Prophet of Allah, should I take medication? Does it go against tawakkul?" And Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he said, "Tadawu ya ibad ar-Rahman." He says, take medication. Although there's a fiqh of medication, there are certain medication, the results are definite. There are other medications, the results are probable. And then there are trial medications, and the results are imagined. And this leads to another discussion of medical ethics. Is a person obligated to take a medication which is not even approved, and which is it's ongoing? Would it be permissible? Yes. Would it be sunnah? No.
Jazakallah khair. Thank you, Sheikh Fayaz. My last question for separate sections, and then we have some common question. But in this section is for Dr. Naweed Syed. How does this COVID-19 isolation work? How does it work? And what else can we do to stop the spread of this disease?
I think, continuing to support what the Sheikh was saying earlier, that Imam Ali's his saying is that you consider yourself to be a mortal human being, whereas the fact is that within you, the whole universe is concealed within you. All the diseases that you have come from you, and then the cure is also from within you. So I think, we have been taught and given the lessons all around that, look at the sun, the moon, ponder on this. And Allah has said also, you cannot even create a fly. It's the challenges at the same time. But then he says that you cannot even take the food back from the mouth of the fly that it has just taken. So I think, we need to be able to really ponder on all these miracles, and then they are bestowed in Quran. Unfortunately, sometimes we try to combine, compare science with religion, whereas Allah is the one who has created the universe and has the code of creation written, and described very well. So for this particular spread, I think I'll tell you an exciting neurobiology story. So now these viruses, once again, going back to flies or bees, these are, especially the honeybees. When these bees are infected by a particular virus, as they enter their hive, they are not greeted by the other flies. They don't do hug and kiss. They don't touch each other. They don't come even closer, but rather they stay away from each other. So these infected flies, they label them with a green fluorescent protein, and then they tagged all of them and monitored their behavior. And it turned out that those bees that are infected are actually isolated. They quarantine themselves. They don't go into the baby quarters. They don't go where the queen is. They come and do their job, and then they leave. So when the virus saw this, it said, these guys are getting really clever. They are preventing the spread of my RNA. So what do? It actually went and it infected some of these bees. And then when these bees go to a different colony, the guy these guards who guard those colonies, all of a sudden do not investigate them or interrogate them or do the body check for them. They don't even want to go near them. As a result, these bees then actually enter the hive. And this is how the virus really, causes interesting problems, for the hive. But these, what we call, the guards, Yasubuddin, I don't know whether this really applies to the queen bee or the guards that check all of these, make sure the quality is maintained. They don't go near these infected bees, and as a result, they really enter. And then the entire colony in the neighborhood gets infected. So I think the lessons that nature has bestowed, we should learn from it. And the lower animals and organisms teach us a great deal about this isolation and how best to really spread this. And then the Sheikh also elegantly described about how to wash your hands, because these viruses don't have any coating. You wash for 2 minutes and you can get rid of these. So I think this is the best practice that we are doing. Our government has done a good job. Our healthcare folks have advised and they have done a good job. So inshallah, I think with a collective effort, we will be able to beat these beasts.
Thank you. The next few questions are for both of you, and either of you can take the question first. First question is there a silver lining to this catastrophe?
I'll let Professor Imam Naweed take it, inshallah.
So I think there really is indeed a silver lining, because, we have transgressed our authority that has been bestowed as Ashraful Makhlukat. We started to eat every single beast on the planet. Allah said, leave these. And thankfully, some of these animals were declared haram. Otherwise, we would have eaten them as well. We don't leave anything in an animal, from toe to its brain, to tongue, to ears. Everything is consumed. So we have transgressed in many ways into nature. I think staying away from this, we have also really destroyed the planet by overindulgence in eating the food our own needs. We have also mixed up the society in a way that there is no kind of any restraint or restrictions left for all of us. So I think there are lessons to be learned that now the nature is coming back, the ozone layer is repairing. So in our own transgressions against the mother nature, we have actually raped and also destroyed the mother nature. We have not really, we have gone too close into the animals where we were not supposed to be. So another important lesson learned, we also have to really not ignore and wait for a super bug to come and then try to handle it. So I think we've gotten some wisdom that we cannot wait. These viruses will come back. They've been here for much longer and they will really get back to us as well. So I think there are many, many important lessons that are to be learned. The politicians and then also all the religious authorities and the public at large. It is a common problem. We all have to work together to solve these issues.
Thank you. And, I don't know about your area, but certainly where I live, I've seen more wildlife on the streets. They're roaming around looking for human beings. So certainly they're reclaiming the territory that we had ejected them from.
I think that in Lahore, in Pakistan, all these wild dogs were wondering whether all the humans have been captured by the municipality and taken to some place. What happened to them?
Yeah, maybe. So Sheikh Fayaz, do you want to add anything to this?
No, mashallah, that was a beautiful answer. I think, we were, a species which were rebelling against the resources of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the ozone layer is being repaired. MashaAllah, wildlife is coming out and they're feeling that they're in their natural habitat. And also we have an obligation, al-ilaju, al-manu khayrun min al-ilaji, that an ounce of prevention is better than a pound of cure. I think we need to get ahead of this, inshallah. So next time, I hope not, but the sunnah of Allah is that something else will come our way that we're much better prepared. And I think one thing which is important is that it's humbled ourselves, and it's created discipline in our lives as well. We were living as if we were kings, and we were worshiping our own souls and our desires. Go to any restaurant when I want, how I want, whenever I want, right? And now I can't even go to my neighbor's home, let alone my favorite restaurant, or more importantly, my masjid. I think we took our masajid for granted. We took our handshakes for granted. We took hugs for granted. Eid, on the day of Eid, like, really? Am I going to drive by, how many people? 30,000 people's homes who usually meet me after my khutbah? The thing that we took for granted, that is a great lesson that we've learned from this.
Absolutely. And the next question, which is again, either one of you can respond, but it starts with faith. So maybe Sheikh Fayaz can start with that. How is faith different and similar in relation to science in understanding of such disasters and dealing with it?
So we've all, studied the book, the 100 most influential ranking persons in history, written by Michael Hart. I think Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he always spoke about faith and theology, and how Quran is a book primarily of guidance, but it doesn't necessarily negate science. It actually promotes science, and it takes science into great consideration as well. So whatever we're doing, I think those brothers and sisters who are fasting and making dua that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala uplifts this epidemic from us is equally important and comparable to our brothers and sisters who are in their labs trying to find a cure to save people from such situations that they're in pain or they lose life as well. I think science is very compatible with Islam, and we have an obligation to further science. And there are many hadith. One hadith that is very important that I've already mentioned is لِكُلِّ دَاءٍ دَوَاءٌ, that for every cure there is a disease, and for every disease there is a cure, and anybody who's working towards advancing any cure, kudos to you. Keep up the great work, and without a doubt, you'll get rewarded for your intention, inshallah.
Yeah, well, I'm glad to hear that you're supporting science. So Dr. Syed will be happy with that. So, Dr. Syed, do you want to add anything?
I think, this is really an artificial separation that has been created. And I think when they did in the Roman times, or even the church tried to do this, their scientists then retaliated, and then they retaliated in a sense that completely demolished the religious beliefs. And the Bible was on back foot, and they kept changing and changing and changing. Alhamdulillah, Quran has never been a change, and Allah has promised that it will be kept. And when we followed the teachings of Quran and the teaching of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, who said that, you know, when you go in search of knowledge, the angels spread their wings underneath your feet, and the fish down in the ocean and the birds in the sky, they ask for your forgiveness. So I think, you know, many hadiths that even a scientific or a scholar is in the community as if he is the prophet among among its people. So there are many hadiths where they actually force, and when we followed the teachings of Quran, we brought in the golden era of Islam. We were performing cataract surgery 600 years before Europe. We knew human anatomy 1,000 years before Europe. All the diseases, astronomy, you know, isolation, hospitals, pharmacies. This is all the creation of Muslim scholars, when we actually were the true believers, when we did not separate these two like the church did. The science is separate, and then the religion is separate. In Islam, there is no separation. I think that is really one of the most important things. And Sheikh said also the prayers are really very important, not for your own self being, but also connecting to Allah. And I think different people will connect to different ways. If you are really following, for example, contemplate long enough, multiple times the worships, we have 5 times, you know, we pray at other times as well. Remarkable really things happen in your brain. Your brain begins to change, and it begins to change in a remarkable ways, that there are new dendrites are formed, new synaptic connections are formed, and your brain will really you know, undergo this transformation. And depending upon really how much you take it seriously, on whether you do it for the greater good of humanity, not for the fear of. Imam Ali has also said, I do not worship Allah for the fear, you know, of hellfire, because that would be the worship of a slave, and I do not worship Allah because I wish to go to paradise where I see all these, you know, beautiful things and great things. I worship him because he's worthy of worship. So if you look at brain, actually, if you only stimulated the fear, your amygdala, lower parts of the brain is activated, the quality of your worship and transformation will be very different. Then if you only thought about paradise, then your really, you know, nucleus accumbens will be activated, that part. Your thinking will be very different. But Allah has 99 names, and it stimulates every single part of the brain. And that allows you to be able to come, that if I ask you to draw the picture or conceptualize God, you cannot, because it really empowers your brain to a level whereby not only your own self-wellness becomes completely changed, but you become an integrated member of the society.
Thank you. I don't know, I know both of you are busy people, so I want to check with you how much time do we have. We are at 5:03, so we are 3 minutes over time, over the hour. I can continue, and there are 9 questions. I want to know how much time either of you have, so we don't want to push you.
I think it's because of fasting, it's really hard to speak. So, but we will try our best as much as you like.
Thank you, Sheikh Fayaz.
I've got about 5 minutes. I have to actually recite my juz to one of my teachers. So
okay. So I have a couple of questions for you. Maybe then I will let you go. I think why don't we do this? That I'll just take a couple of questions and then we'll conclude, because that way it's respectful to everybody. And my apologies to those whose question will not be answered, but it just testifies to the fact that we need to have these discussions. Maybe perhaps continue with that. So the first question is from a brother. I like to ask questions to Imam Fayaz Tili, why can't all the Imams start empowering Muslim community to encourage to gain knowledge directly from Quran and Hadith amid COVID-19? It's been learned that Muslim community, including myself, relied and depend too much on Imams for their religious duties, that somehow we become handicapped and intellectually bankrupt. How can we start self-education How can we enlighten ourselves and start intellectual research ourselves? Great question, but tough question.
Yeah, it's a great question. I think the answer is multidimensional and multifaceted as well. I think we live in an era of information, but we're still thirsty for knowledge, and that's why there's a titanic difference between knowledge and information. I think that has to be made clear. When it comes to theology and Islam, and similarly when it comes to medicine and science, one can learn and access information on their own, but it has to be qualified by a person who's actually trained and has some experience in disseminating and contextualizing that information as well. Big props to the Northwest Islamic Association of Calgary. I started something in Calgary called the Ilm Intensive, a knowledge intensive. It's not about Imam duties or not. And we've been teaching about 40 courses or 45 courses throughout the past 10 years. And it's only through inviting scholars to our area, taking a book, gutting that book academically, critical thinking, collaboration, creativity, and communication that we'll be able to bring about a better world. There are many things that we need to sponsor and take care of in this COVID-19 pandemic, but I think the greatest crisis is the crisis of knowledge. If the crisis of knowledge would be rectified, many things would follow better thereafter.
Thank you, Jazakallah khair. Next question.
I think, can I add something to that, please?
Sure.
I think, it's a really great question, and it's a question across the entire Muslim Ummah as well. Our problem really is that we don't read ourselves. So a person who doesn't read is no better than a person who cannot read. We expect our ulamas to come in, 1 month of Ramadan or other times to just pour all the knowledge, stuff it into us, and then we consider ourselves to be really liberated. And I think the fault lies with us. And I think if we were to study ourselves, we will push our ulama and also our scholars to really think at a much higher level rather than really staying at a pedestrian. So, and I would also like to say that the Islam really, says that don't accept God, without irrational reasoning. And it requires that one really ponders individually. So it is really individual responsibility of each and every individual person to really go and explore and understand. And even if doubt comes, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will forgive you because He has asked you to think, because you will be held accountable for on the basis of your intellect and what you have done. Quran did not hand things over to us. Quran has actually given indications and signs, be that in the stars and the moon, the earth and the clouds, the water, creation of humans, all the species, the universe. There are only signs, but it is us who need to really do the homework and go and explore those.
Thank you. The next question, I'll take part of that question. The second part of that question is very long, so I'll just take that. And my apologies to other people who really have their questions. Perhaps I can just send these questions to Sheikh Fayaz and Professor Naweed Imam Syed for later. That question is directed to Dr. Syed. Can we take these, viral cells or cancer, the infectious viruses and use them to kill cancer cells? That's a question that is being asked.
I think that's a really great question, and maybe a $3 million question, whereby if you have the facility to actually really engineer these viruses. But the problem with any genetic engineering is that you don't know what you will end up with. So you can play and design these specific viruses, which we do, and we keep them contained and restricted. But who knows, this virus could have been in the laboratory, and then when it got out, it actually turned into something very, very different. So I think it's really important that yes, not only the viruses, but the immune system that these viruses activate can be used to tackle. So immunosuppressant procedures could be activated by engineered, body's defense mechanisms and those cells. Yes, the answer is yes, the viruses could actually be treated, but you don't know what you may end up with in the longer run. You may even have a bigger problem.
Thank you, sir. Before conclusion, this will be the last one. Sheikh Fayaz, any last words before we conclude?
No, I just wanted to actually add to what Professor Imam Naweed said, and that is, Sayyidina Ali radiallahu anhu, it's the month of Ramadan, and he said there are four types of worshippers. There's a worshipper like a slave. He just worships Allah because he's afraid of God. Don't subscribe to that form of worship. There's a second type of worshipper who worship with a business entrepreneurial paradigm. If I read Qul Huwallahu 10 times, I get a palace in Jannah, right? Don't be a businessman when it comes to Allah. Then there's a person who's just a slave. He worships Allah because he wants to establish his slavehood when it comes to Allah. That's great. But don't even limit yourself to that. Sayyidina Ali radiallahu anhu, he said, worship Allah because you love Allah. And when we worship Allah because we love Allah, then we will see many miracles come into our life and in the lives of those that we love as well. So I wanted to end with that, inshallah.
Thank you, Jazakallah khair. Professor Naweed, Syed, last words.
So I would also, I think, like to say that, even though all the miracles, that have been shown in Quran, from the creation of this universe and then, to creation of humans and human cloning, where Prophet Isa alayhi salam was created, and then the creation of human beings, all of these aspects, we would have restrained ourselves saying that only Allah can do this. But then Allah has also given his amr to many of these, his own, humans, his prophets, whereby Prophet Isa alayhi salam could kick somebody, a dead person, and say, Qum bi iznillah, and he could actually heal the, the blind and the people who were really diseased. And Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam, he was asked to cut up 4 birds and then put them on 4 different corners, and he called them and they all came back. So I think the powers on all of these miracles that Allah has given has also empowered humans, us humans, provided that if we seek knowledge, to seek our science, or even ulum, a different knowledge of religion, theology, to really seek closeness to Allah. So, to get closer to Allah. And I think that really is the most important thing. And people ask me, I can write the best essay with my science and my intellect, and if you take the lights off, I can't read it. So my iman is actually that nur which provides the true meaning to what knowledge I have, and I have really communicated.
Jazakallah khair. In the end, I want to thank both panelists, Sheikh Fayaz. Thank you very much. I know that this is a busy month for you. You are doing lots of things in the community. So Jazakallah for doing that and finding time for this. And Professor Naweed Syed, I know how busy you are. I have seen you on international panels doing all kinds of things, busy all the time. So I really appreciate you finding time. So I think this was a very enlightening discussion. I learned a lot from this. And I think in general, I would say, I feel so energized by this that I think we should have more of these discussions. So thank you, both of you. And thank you for all the people who have been listening and those who have been watching us on Facebook Live. So thank you. Jazakallah khair. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Rahman, for your really spearheading this. I think this is not an easy thing, but I think you have handled it really well. So may Allah bless you in this month and your family, and then everybody else. May Allah's blessing be with everyone.
Thank you. Jazakallah khair. Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum assalam.